Alright, in this video we're going to talk through meanders a bit more, and I'm going to give you some feedback on yesterday's work, and we are also going to talk through the formation of levees and some feedback on that work as well. Okay, so on my presentation is an attempt at a drawing of a meander being a bend in a river. You'll notice that there's two different types of lines on my drawing, a dotted line and a line. The line represents where the flow is fast, where there is a high velocity. The dotted line represents where there is a low velocity, so where the flow is slow. You'll notice that the river has a high velocity on the outside of the bend, so on the outside of this bend and on the outside of that bend, and it has a low velocity on the inside of the bend. Just think about that. If you are running around a corner, you've got further to run if you're running around the outside of the corner than if you're running around the inside of the corner. So anything travelling around the outside is going to have to travel faster than something travelling around the inside of a bend. So water always flows faster around the outside of the bend than it does on the inside of the bend. We need to make that bit absolutely clear in our answers, and the terminology or the vocabulary that we're going to use is the outside of a meander has a high velocity, whereas the inside of a meander has a low velocity. Okay, the next bit is that because it has a high velocity on the outside of the bend, the water erodes the river banks. Whereas, because the velocity is low on the inside of the bend, sediment, or so the small bits that a river is carrying, sediment gets deposited on the inside of the bend. Lots of you in your answers, you talked about erosion or deposition, but you hadn't talked about both of them. It's really important that a meander is formed by both erosion and deposition. So you need to talk about both in your answer. And we can see here where I've attempted to draw a slip-off slope, so that the deposition on the inside of the bend creates a slip-off slope, and that's just like a mini beach. Whereas the erosion on the outside of the bend creates a river cliff. Over time, that meander is going to become bendier, and the word that we're going to use for that is more pronounced. So you must include in your answers that over time the meander becomes more pronounced. Then, when the river floods, the meander is cut off, leaving behind the old channel which we call an oxbow lake. Come on, PowerPoint. Right. The other thing that we needed to include is the names of erosion. We know that the river erodes on the outside of a meander due to having a high velocity. And the way it erodes that riverbank is by hydraulic action and abrasion. It's not going to erode by attrition, because attrition happens to the load, to the rocks that the river is carrying, rather than the river channel. So the meander is eroded by hydraulic action and by abrasion. We've been talking a lot recently about how you can make your answers more specific, and including named examples of erosion and explaining them is one way that you can do that when we're talking about rivers. Let's have a look at a selection of answers then. Just pause the video, take a couple of minutes to read through this answer. Okay, one of the things I really liked about this answer was that we got a good use of keywords. We're using geographical terminology like neck, that's the inside of two bends, oxbow lake, river channel, great, and we got all the stages of oxbow lake formation included. A couple of things that we need to change. Here, this sentence, over time the meanders begin to widen as the outside of the meander carries more energy than the inside, causing the meander to stretch out wider. I know what you mean. Yeah, I was talking about the river becoming bendier, the meander to get wider. The wording that we're going to use is causing the meander to become more pronounced. We also need to add in that it's erosion and deposition. So over time, meanders begin to widen as the water in the outside of the meander carries more energy, so it erodes the outside of the meander, causing the meander to become more pronounced. Whereas on the inside of the meander, what happens? Well, there's less energy, it's got a lower velocity, so we get deposition. The other thing we need to make sure that we've included is that when we're talking about Oxbow Lake formation, we need to say that the water cuts through the neck of the old meander during a flood. So Oxbow Lakes are only formed during a flood. That water cutting off the old channel, there needs to be a lot of water for that to happen. So it must happen during a period of high discharge or in a flood. Take a minute to read through this one. Again, a good answer with all the basics in there. We've got the keywords, velocity, Oxbow Lake channel. We've got all the stages in there as well. I just want to change the wording of this. The horseshoe will become tighter and the ends close together due to deposition. Yes, that's right. But we're going to say that the meander will become more pronounced. And the ends will move close together due to deposition and erosion. Again, we need to say that the river will break and the old channel will be cut off from the other body of water during a flood. We also need to name some of the process of erosion. Take a minute, read through this one. Okay, I really like the fact that we're talking about deposition as well as erosion in this answer. So look at the first sentence. Meanders form when erosion occurs on the outside of the bend with a high velocity and deposition occurs on the inside of the bend. Great, we're talking about erosion and we're talking about deposition as well. We need to add in why that deposition occurs. Why does deposition occur on the inside of the bend? Because the water has a lower velocity. Let's look at the next sentence. Over time, the meander becomes more pronounced. Great, so we got that phrase in, it's becoming more pronounced as more erosion and deposition occur. Fantastic. Erosion causes the neck of the meander to become narrower. Great phrasing there. We're talking about the neck becoming narrower. Good. And due to periods of high discharge, the river goes through the neck rather than around it. Excellent. We got that idea about the river flooding and then cutting off the old river channel in there. Deposition then causes the rest of the meander to be cut off, leaving behind an Oxbow Lake. Yes, this is almost a perfect answer. The only thing that this answer needs to add in is an example of the types of erosion. What I would like you to do now is have another go at it. I'll put a link on onto Microsoft Forms so that you can complete it online. Or if you want, you can do it in your book and send me a photograph, whatever works for you. And I've got a checklist here that things you need to include. You need to name the types of erosion. You need to write about both deposition and erosion. You need to conclude that the meander is becoming more pronounced rather than getting bendier or getting tighter. You need to include that the neck of the meander becomes narrower due to erosion. And you also need to include, and I should have put this on here, that the old meander is cut off during a period of high discharge or a flooding period. Pause me while you give that a go and then we'll move on. Cool. The second thing we need to talk about is levee formation. Now, levees happen when a river floods. We start off with the water flowing down the river channel in the lower course of the river. So these floodplains are found near the river's mouth. And on here I've attempted to draw a river channel here with some water in it. And in the lower course, the river channel is going to be wide and deep. Right. When that river channel floods, the water carries in it the sediment or the load that the river has been transporting. Some bits of that load are going to be big and heavy, and some bits are going to be small and light. Right, if you're carrying a big and heavy bag and a small and light bag, which bag are you going to want to put down first? Well, you're going to drop the big and heavy stuff first, aren't you? So when a river floods, the heaviest sediment is deposited first, and the lightest sediment is deposited last. What that means is that the heaviest sediment is deposited nearer the river channel, whilst the lightest sediment is deposited further away from the river channel. Over time, after repeated floods, we get mounds forming from the heaviest sediment, which has been deposited near the river channel. And we call those mounds levees. And that's it. That is how levees are formed. It's as simple as the river flooding, the heaviest material is deposited, the lightest material is carried out, and the lightest material that's carried out away from the river forms the floodplain. Take a minute to read through this answer. It's explaining the formation of a floodplain. Okay, so what I really like about this is that they've included that as the river floods, the river loses velocity as there is increased friction and with the floodplain. So when the river floods, before it was flowing down the river channel. Now it's flowing over a much shallower area, so it loses energy, it loses its velocity, and that is what causes the deposition to happen. Then we put that the depositive load creates a levee, and then some of the load is dropped further along, making a floodplain. Good, but what we need to add in is it's the heaviest load that creates the levee because it's deposited first. Then the lightest sediment is deposited rather than dropped further along, making the floodplain. So, task 2, I'd like you to give this another go. Again, I'll put a link to forms online if you want to complete it online, or do it in your book and send me a photograph. Either way, give that levee one another go. I just want to say, before I finish this video, and before it's half term next week, that I have been really impressed with the quality of work that you are producing. Considering that I'm not there for you to ask questions, and working from home is difficult in the best of circumstances, let alone a global pandemic, you've been coping really well with it, and the quality of your work is good. It's clear that you're putting in the effort and you are getting learning out of this time, and that's really going to pay off when we go back to school. Enjoy your half term. If I can work out how to end the video, that will be all from me.